Hello, I am Dr. Naomi Norman. I worked on the writing of the Pearson Teaching Hub for International GCSE Mathematics. I'm going to show you how to use the hub to teach mathematics and help your students achieve examination success. Before we delve in, I thought we would take a quick look at a real examination question. It is a question from this paper, Paper 2 of the higher level IGCSE Mathematics examination taken in January 2022. This is question 21. It involves a lot of different mathematics topics: compound solids, in this case a cylinder with a hemisphere on top, algebra because dimensions are given in terms of x, surface area and mass. Students have to use all this information to identify the metal the solid is made from, and so they must be familiar with density and of course its formula involving mass and volume. The examiner's report says this question was answered with a varying degree of success. In particular, it states there were a lot of errors when finding surface area, as students forgot to include the base, and that some students used the volume of a sphere rather than halving for a hemisphere. It also says that algebraic manipulation of the first equation was sometimes poor. This equation would have been a quadratic. And finally, the report states in relation to the answering of this question that on occasion marks were lost due to early rounding. All these mathematical topics, including the importance of the timing of rounding, are of course covered by the Teaching Hub. So let's have a look at how a few of these topics are addressed. You can find topics by clicking here on the scheme of work for the course, which shows the specification coverage. You can search the scheme of work for keywords that describe topics. So, for example, by searching for density, I can see that lesson 13 covers compound measures, and if I look across to the right to the specification point, it includes density. By searching for surface area, I can see that lessons 56 and 57 both address surface area, but by looking to the right at the related specification points, it is lesson 57 that covers cylinders. By searching for volume in a similar way, I can see that it is lesson 84 that covers the specification point relating to volume of a sphere. And there are also several lessons that relate to quadratic equations, but it is lesson 74 that covers forming and solving quadratic equations from data given in a context. So as you can see, we have lessons that address every concept in the examination question we looked at earlier. In fact, you can be confident that by using all the lessons on Pearson Teaching Hub, you will be covering the entire Pearson Edexcel IGCSE Mathematics specification. I can navigate to any of the lessons in the IGCSE Mathematics course on Connexus. First of all, let's go to lesson 57, Surface Area 2, which covers the surface area of a cylinder. Each Teaching Hub lesson has exactly the same components: an overview, which gives a high-level summary of the lesson content, some teaching guidance, and a set of resources. A good starting point before teaching any lesson is to look at the overview. Let's start with the learning objectives. Notice that they are offered in a list and as a slideshow, which can be displayed for your students in your lesson. The same is true for key definitions. There is a list and also a slideshow to share with students. In the overview, there is also a list of prior knowledge so that you can check the concepts your students should already know before your lesson begins. And if I scroll down a little further, there is a very useful section called Common Errors and Misconceptions, which doesn't just list the errors and misconceptions to look out for, but also makes really useful suggestions on how to address them. Then, a little beyond that, under Resources, there is a link to the relevant pages of the student book, allowing you to seamlessly integrate both the digital and the printed resource in your classroom. If we go back to the menu of lessons and lesson 57, we can take a look at the teacher guidance. Let's look at the starter. This is usually a slide or a couple of slides that you can display for students to consider as soon as they arrive in your classroom and while they're waiting for your lesson to start. Let's also look at the warm-up skills. I can see that question 1 gives students a quick practice at working out the circumference and area of a circle. Remember that the examiner's report in January 2022 stated that students often ignore the cylinder's base when finding the surface area. So let's look at how this lesson emphasises the base. In teaching session 1, it suggests that you ask students to list all the faces of a cylinder, and there is a slide that shows the net of a cylinder so that students can clearly see that its surface area does indeed include both the faces on the top and its base. Sometimes, as well as slideshows, you'll find very short videos in teaching sessions too. All teaching sessions are followed by worked examples for you to step through with your students. If we look at the first of these after teaching session 1, we can see that the area of the faces are left in terms of pi. It is suggested that you ask students why it is better to leave these answers in terms of pi before rounding and working out the final answer. This addresses that point made in the January 2022 examiner's report, which states that marks were lost due to early rounding. The lesson also includes independent work for students to do on their own, which in this case is a worksheet. There is a support section that takes students through the concept at a slower pace and with additional explanation. There's also a challenge activity for students who are capable of more stretch, and then there is an end of lesson activity for reflection on what has been learnt, and a homework sheet too, as well as alternative starter and end of lesson activities should you wish to split this content over 2 lessons. So you can see there is really everything you could possibly need here to teach the concept of surface area of cylinders. Let's go back to the 3 components of each lesson and take a very quick look at the resources section. Here you can see a list of all the resources associated with this lesson. Notice that in the top right here there is a teaching mode. This allows you to display one resource after another, just as you might want to in the classroom as you move through your teaching with your students. While if you move into planning mode, you can see the resources in a long list and you can scroll up and down through them so that you can easily see what is available when planning your lessons. Let's return to the menu of lessons and go to a different lesson. Lesson 74, Quadratic Equations 2, and you'll see that once again there is an overview, teacher guidance and resources. If again we go into the teacher guidance, you can see you have a starter, warm-up skills and teaching sessions, just as you did for the previous lesson we looked at. If we open teaching session 1 and scroll down through the teaching and the worked examples, you can see that the independent work this time is not a worksheet, but instead independent work 1 points to the student book, while independent work 2 is a question that you can display on the board. Then once again there are support suggestions, a challenge section, end of lesson activity and homework. So all these lessons have the same format. This way you always know exactly what to expect, making your planning easier and ensuring you have everything you need to teach a highly effective IGCSE mathematics lesson. Look at the menu of lessons in the Teaching Hub for Mathematics and you'll see that lesson 86 is a little different. It is a consolidation and problem-solving lesson. These types of lessons appear from time to time to allow you to review previously learnt concepts but also to give students a very important opportunity to practice meeting a variety of concepts in a single problem-solving context. Here, among the learning objectives, you can see that there are, for example, opportunities for students to practice solving problems involving shape and solids, which require some algebra. The prior knowledge lists not just the concepts students require to be familiar with in order to tackle this lesson, but also the lesson numbers on the Teaching Hub. This is in case you and your students want to revisit any parts of these lessons for a quick recap. If we go to the teacher guidance, you can see that it is a slightly different format to regular lessons. There are 2 teaching sessions, an end of lesson activity, and also a homework. Let's look at teaching session 2. In this teaching session, students are consolidating their understanding of the concepts of surface area, volume and density. And after revisiting these concepts, there are 2 worked examples. Here is the second of them. This type of problem is exactly the sort that could be a latter question in a higher IGCSE mathematics examination. I hope this video has shown you just how comprehensive and immensely useful the Teaching Hub is for your teaching of IGCSE mathematics. We have tried to do all the pedagogical thinking for you, providing regular lessons as well as other useful types of lesson to make your planning and teaching as easy as possible and allow you to focus on what matters most, your students' mathematics learning and IGCSE examination success. Thank you for joining me.